So welcome, friends, to Love in a Big World's EducateU show and podcast. We are glad that you are here today. I have the special privilege of talking again with my friend, Jethro Jones. And today is Teaching During Corona, a pep talk from Jethro Jones. And Jethro has some tips and insights for us all about how to build better relationships, structure assignments for better learning outcomes, and work less and get bigger impact. So I'm really looking forward to this chat. And Jethro, will you just give everybody a sense of who you are and what you're up to, and then we can dig right in.
Yep, I am excited to be here. My name is Jethro Jones. As you mentioned, I host the Transformative Principal podcast, and it is a podcast I've been doing for about 7 years where I talk with school leaders about how to do things better in their schools. And I look for people who are amazing and try to share their stories. And that's what I've been doing for many years, and it's a lot of fun. I've been a principal as well, and I recently left that to do consulting full time. So I help people redesign their schools to make them work better for the kids that are right there in front of them. And so that's what I do. So today, I want to kind of like pump everybody up and like get you feeling like you can actually do this, because, you know, I live in Washington now, and the governor just released new mandates, closing restaurants, are limiting their capacity, and it's we're all going through a lot, and it's tough. And some people are teaching in person, some people are only teaching online, some people are doing both, which I personally think is super hard, and kudos to anybody who's doing that. And I feel like teachers right now are just already doing so much, it's just unreal for them to think about all the things that they have to do. But I want to give some hope and help you learn how to have some success in COVID. But the good thing is like many things, this can extend beyond COVID, and you can still use some of these tools to help you be successful even after. And what I want to talk about first is that it's this idea of having these three things in place: trust, patience, and a focus on the process. And to me, these things are really, really important. And if we don't have these three things in place, we're going to feel stressed and frustrated. And I think most teachers who became teachers didn't become teachers so that they could only deliver content and have no other interactions with their kids, which is what it feels like we're doing during Corona. So if we can find a way to bring these three things out: trust, patience, and process. I'm going to go into those here in a little bit, but I want you to think about this model of having three things in place in a triangle shape fashion, because they each are important. They each have their value and their place, and they need to exist for us to be able to get through this. And it's like learning to ride a bike. And when you learn how to ride a bike as a child, if you have training wheels on, or you have your dad or mom behind you holding the seat so you don't tip over, you are never going to get great at learning to ride a bike, and you're never going to be able to do it. So one thing that has to happen is that you got to let it go. And you've got to be able to say, I'm going to let these kids go and let them do their thing and let them learn how to grow on their own. It's really, really important and vital for their success for that to happen. So oftentimes when we get in this situation of focusing on teaching, we think about things like, how many standards should our kids pass off in a year? How many things should they learn? And I was just talking to a head of school at an international school this morning, and she brought up the point that her teachers are focused on something that none of them really went into education to do, which is solely delivering content. Now, you know who did go into education to solely deliver content? Sal Khan of Khan Academy, because that's what he did. He saw that he had a gift in teaching people math, and so he started doing that, and that's what he focused on and what he did. So he is there for teaching the content. And that's what he created Khan Academy for, was to deliver content. And I will argue that if your sole focus as a teacher is to deliver content, then that is a job that can very much be replaced by robots, and a job that can be replaced by an internet class like Khan Academy. And I don't think that that's why most people came in. And yet most people probably feel like that's what they're doing right now, that they're not actually doing the work that they came to do, which is to care about, support, and help their kids. And so how many of your students will know you care about them as people this year? This is an important question to ask, because many times, especially during the coronavirus, we get focused on what we're teaching, not who we're teaching. And there's a way, so I used to live in Russia. I was a missionary for my church over there for 2 years, and it was amazing. And one of the things I learned early on was that when you teach something, you don't ever teach something, you teach someone to the topic. So if you were a teacher of math, you would teach students to the math, is how you would say that in Russian. And what I really appreciate about that is that it puts the emphasis and the focus on the kids, that they're the ones who are the focus. The content is not the focus. And here in America, we often say, I teach 9th grade English, or I teach 10th grade math, or algebra 2, or botany, or biology, or whatever it is that we may be teaching. And we think of teaching subjects first. And every great teacher you've ever had has never been someone who taught the subject first. They connected with you as a human being. So between these two questions, how many standards should your kids pass off this year, and how many of your students will know you care about them as people this year, which of those two really speak to what you believe and what you feel as a teacher? And I think for most of us, it's about the caring about them and about knowing them. So there's this cliche, right? Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. That's a cliche, but it actually is really true. And it resonates with all of us, because we all have experienced that to some extent. And we've all seen ways that that has impacted us in our real life, where we have had somebody who tried to tell us what they knew, but we didn't believe they cared about us. And so we basically blew off what they were saying. And as teachers, we really need to focus on making sure that we're doing exactly what this says, that we're caring about our kids first and foremost. And how do we do that in the age of Corona? I know that it's tough. It's really hard. I've been spending a lot of time on the phone calling principals and people who listen to my podcast, and people have interacted with me, because I want them to know that I care about them as individuals and that they matter to me. And that hasn't always been easy, but it's important to do that. And in fact, last week, I was just busy with other stuff and didn't make calling people a priority. And I really felt isolated and disconnected and felt like I missed people. And, it wasn't any different than other weeks during the past couple months, but the difference was that I wasn't reaching out and calling people like I was before. More important than teaching our lessons is spending time talking with kids about what matters to them. And we don't need to spend all this time preparing this amazing lesson and then delivering it to kids who have their videos off and could be playing on their phones, doing something else in another tab or whatever. I mean, that's the reality. So if a kid just needs to log on and watch a YouTube video, you might as well just do that. Have them watch a YouTube video. One that you create is fine. But if they're not interacting and spending time talking with you about what matters to them, it's going to be really challenging for you to connect with them and let them know that you really care about them. So I'm going to take some time now and talk about some stories of how we've done this in my schools, even before coronavirus. And we need to do some adaptation, because not everything is going to work. And, that's okay. That's just a part of life. But I want to reference what Daniel Pink says about what motivates people, and it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I just did a podcast interview with Mike Anderson just the other day, and it's going to come out in a couple months. And he talked about 6 indicators for motivation for kids. And 3 that are not in here that I think should be are a sense of belonging, excuse me, curiosity, and fun. And so if you can have that autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and belonging, fun, and what was the other one? Curiosity. I seem to always forget that one. Then you're going to be much more successful with them. So don't be afraid of increasing those and making them part of what you're doing. In fact, make that your goal. And we're going to take this idea of this trust, patience process, and we're going to adapt that a little bit to make it into a pyramid instead of just a triangle. And so we're going to have patience, trust, and process that are the foundation for student autonomy. And when you have those patience, trust, and process aspects in place, the student autonomy works a lot better. So if our purpose is for kids to have their own motivation and for them to engage in the work that we're trying to create with them, then this is the way that we're going to do it. We're going to get to that through patience, trust, and process. So this is typically what it looks like when we come up with things that we're going to teach kids. We think about what topics we need to cover, how do we get them across, and then how will we evaluate success. That's very natural. There's also the backwards design approach to develop assessments, where you start with the end in mind. What should participants be able to do after the program? What should students know and be able to do? How will I know that they learned it, and how will they learn it? And so as a teacher, you put all this work into doing this work for kids and making sure that it's crystal clear that they are going to be successful in learning the thing that you want them to learn, which is all well and good. And I'm not knocking that. But I'm here to tell you right now, this is really not what we need to be focusing on. Making sure that the academic outcomes are there is pretty far down on our priority list in discussing this with many other educators out there. So the other thing that Mike said that I think is really great is use content as your playground. So you can design lessons as I showed in the previous slide, or you can think of your content area as your playground. This is where you get to play and do the fun kind of things that you would like to do with your kids. So here's how I suggest we do this. And those three indicators of trust, process, and patience are going to come into this here. So we start with an open-ended problem, something that there is a problem out there that we need to solve that means something to the kids. It's actually relevant to what they're dealing with. And then we give them time to create their own solutions, and then we help them overcome their obstacles. And then because we are genius educators and we know the standards so well, and honestly, kids don't care about standards, we're going to attach standards to what they've learned afterwards. So instead of starting with what they need to learn, we're going to start with a problem over here, and we're going to work backwards to find the standards that they accomplish, which means that some kids are going to do some standards and other kids are not going to do those standards. And guess what? That's okay, because guess what? Even in your perfect lesson, some kids still get some standards and some kids don't. So this is us just acknowledging that nobody's perfect and not every kid can learn everything in the same way at the same time. So here's a list of 32 standards that kids needed to learn. In fact, that's not really fair. These 32 standards are actually taken from many different courses from the Alaska State Standards, many different things, arts, employability, English language arts, library information literacy, skills for healthy life, cultural standards, physical education, and government and citizenship. So kids needed to learn these standards. And if we tried to design a lesson to have them meet every one of these standards, or a project or a unit to have them meet all these standards, it would have been nearly impossible to do that. However, some of these standards were even standards that were higher than the grade level my students were in. So we had some constraints. We said you cannot answer student questions, as in if they say, how do I do this? You can't just say, here's how you do it. You have to help them find their own answers to that question. And you can't explicitly teach, which means that if your standard is demonstrate competent skills for participation in non-competitive individual activities, you can't explicitly teach how to do that. You have to observe and evaluate that they can do that because of your observation, not because you explicitly taught them and they passed some test. Excuse me. So typically, this is where we would say, if you do this, then we're gonna have some great results. And that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for test scores. What we're looking for is, are people satisfied with how things have gone? And when we did this project with these students that passed off those 32 standards, we had a significant number of our families that said they're very pleased. And guess what? We had people who said they didn't like it too. And guess what? We're always going to have people that don't like what we're doing. And it's okay to admit that. And so what you do with those people who don't like it, you do your best to try to adapt and adjust and make it work for them. So Seth Godin, who I'm a big fan of, he says, as long as we embrace or even accept standardized testing, fear of science, little attempt at teaching leadership, and most of all, the bureaucratic imperative turn education into a factory itself, we're in big trouble. And more than anything, this is what I've heard from teachers during the pandemic. It feels like we're just doing the factory model. We've been forced, quote unquote, to go back to just getting kids through content. And many innovative schools have abandoned and dropped the things they were doing because they were too hard to do in coronavirus and to do it remotely. We need to push back against that. Now, I'm going to play some audio and hopefully this works. Tamara, tell me if it doesn't.
The key part is that learning is different than education. And the fact is that when we learn something, it gets stronger over time. Education fades. After the test, we forget what we memorized. But learning persists because we start to see the world a different way, and it compounds forward and forward.
So if our focus is on learning and not just on getting kids through the system, it's going to grow over time, it's going to compound, and the things that kids learn are going to stay with them for longer. Now, why am I saying we should totally change how we're teaching in the middle of a pandemic? Because we don't have the time that we've had with our kids. We don't have the time to have those casual conversations that we've had in the past because we need to stay 6 feet apart. If we're in person, if we're not in person, kids log on for the start of class and then they log off at the end. And we don't have that informal, casual conversation that we used to have. And if you want to bring that thing back to your staff, at least, jethrojones.com/watercooler is a place where I put some help and support to help you figure out how to do that with your staff. Those things work with students as well. But we've lost a key aspect of our interpersonal relationships, which is that casual, informal conversation. So these kids, they had an idea where they wanted to build a hovercraft. I said, here's a problem, an open-ended problem. What can you do to make the world a better place? These kids said we should have a hovercraft. And so they did it. And what is amazing about that is that they figured out how to make it work. And they figured out how to accomplish something that they didn't know was really an issue about 2 weeks before they started. And then they learned that there is a way to do a hovercraft and we have the tools already necessary. And they figured out how to do that. Now, did these kids learn all the same things as kids who were doing a different project? No, they didn't. But what they learned will stay with them and will be compounded as time goes on because of the experience they had. So here's another group. This is the Tanana team leaders. And these kids wanted to teach other kids how to do dance, volleyball, and soccer, dance or cheer. And so they did both of those things. So they taught the kids how to do this. This is the group that passed off those 32 standards. They learned how to communicate. They learned how to persuade a principal of another school to allow her students to come over to our school at negative 40-degree temperatures and still participate and do this fun thing during their school day. Now, what was so amazing about this was these girls thought that to make the world a better place, they should get these kids involved in some activity when they were in second grade. And so they found a way to make that happen. They worked together, they made the proposals, they wrote letters, and they got permission to do all of these things, which was amazing. so incredible. And as you look at this video of these kids, you see them happy and excited and engaged and having fun. And it's just incredible what they were able to do. Did this group learn something different than the hovercraft group? Yes, they did. And you know what? That's okay also. So what we want kids to be able to do is to have that autonomy and have that patience and have that trust from us. Here is another team, and this one does have audio, about our STEP crew at our school and some of the things that they did that they started because they were the ones in charge of this process. No adult was there saying, here's what we need to do. They said, this is a need, we need to do it.
Learning leadership, communication, and even math through dance. Tanana Middle School has a new option for students to explore their passions. Julia Lowdy brings us the music of STEP.
Tanana Middle has a new dance team.
Who are we? TSC. Who are we? TSC. Tanana step. Eagles, break it down now.
Your body is your instrument. That's what STEP is, making beats, but with your body.
It's about working together.
So, teamwork, excellent, and participation.
A deep family tradition has brought Micaiah Kirkwood, Talia Freeman, and Janila Solomon together.
My mom is in the sorority, Zeta Phi Beta Incorporated, and I never miss a step show when she steps.
It's like in your blood.
But it won't always be easy.
Students always say their job is easy. Some people won't say teachers, whoa, it's not easy, it's not.
And it's not just dancing.
Leadership skills, communication skills. They're going to end up having to do budgeting and math if they want to travel places and meet their goals that they're setting with one another.
Tryouts for the Tanana Step crew will be taking place later this month. The girls plan to perform at other venues outside of school.
Tanana Middle School will be coming to show y'all what we got in store for y'all.
So bring it.
Bring it.
And I still got a T-A-N,
This is Julia Lowdy reporting.
So these girls saw a problem that we were not, we didn't have opportunities for them to express themselves through a STEP team. And so they create a solution to that problem. Did they learn different things than the hovercraft and the team leaders that were teaching cheer, volleyball, and soccer? Yes. And again, that's okay. So they learned a lot of skills. And what we found is that a lot of the skills overlapped, that they learned leadership, they learned communication skills, reading, writing, and research were all part of everybody's project because those skills are universal and are needed. And we saw that kids achieved things at a low level, or their grade level, and at a high level, which was above their grade level. And when we're teaching, we're not teaching kids to go above their grade level. We're teaching them to be at their grade level. And so these opportunities allowed them to grow even more. So we called this synergy, and this is how we did it school-wide. And again, during coronavirus, it needs to look a little bit different. But the focus, if you can focus on that autonomy piece, then you can have it be successful. And I really think that right now is the perfect time to be solving problems. There are plenty of problems out there and plenty of ways that kids can get involved in something that they personally care about and find really relevant to their life. Now, we gave them an hour and 45 minutes twice a week, and our only instruction to them was solve a problem that will make an impact on the world. And they got to define each of those terms. We didn't define them for them. They decided what the problem was, how big it was, make an impact, what the impact was, and the world could be just a small group of kids. One group decided that they wanted to help other kids learn how to do sign language. And so they did a little sign language class and they taught each other sign language. And here's the amazing part. My oldest daughter, who has Down syndrome, who had never had a leadership opportunity in school before, because she's had exposure and experience with sign language, was able to be a leader in that group as well. And so kids who typically get marginalized or don't get as many opportunities, she was brought to be an example and a leader for everybody else, which I've got to say, as a dad, made me pretty proud. But as a principal, to see them accept her and accept her gifts for what they were, that made me even more proud. So there is a flaw with this, though. This is not something that that scales well as far as the traditional stuff that we do in education, because it requires one thing: you must focus on the individual students. And right now, I think this is more important than it has ever been before. If you're focusing on the individual students, you're going to see better results, better engagement, better care from them if they know that you care about them individually. So as I mentioned, we need three things to make this work. We need to focus on patience, trust, and the process, not the end product. There were many things that kids created that they never even did. So the first thing I want to talk about is having patience. I'd love to show you something cool here, but some of these groups never created anything that was worth showing. And that's just a part. Tana Martin, our librarian, had something great to say. I'm going to show it later, but I got to say it here. She said, these kids sure haven't accomplished much, but they sure have learned a lot. And so in our eyes, when we're focusing on the end product, the end thing, then we may be disappointed. If we focus on the process, then we're going to see a lot of things happen. So we need to have patience and wait for that to happen. The second thing is we need to show trust. We need to allow them to do things that we might not be ready for. And to have kids leave one school and go to another in negative 40-degree weather is not typically what happens. But we trusted these girls that they had a good plan. We know that they did good work. And so it was easy to trust them to make that happen. And it was really amazing to see the dedication that they had and the focus that they had when they were there in front of those kids. They took safety very seriously and worked hard to ensure that kids were going to be safe and not hurt themselves in any way. And we didn't have any incidents at all because the youth actually did a better job than our teachers of making sure kids were safe, because they knew that they wouldn't be able to do it if anybody got injured. And so they made sure that nothing ever happened to anybody. And again, I talked about this a little bit before, but focus on the process. It's about what the kids are doing, not what they complete. And so one student got a group of kids together and said, we want to make a social network where we can make sure that there's no bullying happening at all. So they started doing that. Huge, ambitious project. They did not come even close to getting that done, but that wasn't the goal. You know, they said, this is our vision. This is what we want to do. But for me, the goal was for them to learn. The goal was not for them to complete this thing. And they learned a ton. They learned how to network. They learned how to communicate with others so that they could learn about different things. And they learned a bunch of coding and web development stuff, which was a really awesome experience for them as well. But if we would have just focused on the product, you didn't complete it, therefore you don't get the grade. That would not have been fair to them or beneficial to them either, because that changes what they're working on and it puts restraints that aren't helpful on it. It's really important to focus on the process of learning, not just on the end product that you get as a result. So in this video, you can see these kids that are happy and excited to be learning step moves, and that's great. And everybody's having a good time. And this is where these students took on leadership opportunities and were able to help them learn and grow themselves. And that process was just incredible. And here's that quote by Tana at RunnerGirlT on Twitter. She said, these kids haven't accomplished much, but they sure have learned a lot. And this is so, so important. So often in education, we focus on the product, on the end result, and that's not the most important thing for us to pay attention to. We need to focus on the process that they're going through and what they're learning through that process. So here are, just a bunch of the different ideas and projects that kids were working on. There's not enough time to talk about each of them, but as you're looking through this list of all the different things that they did, think about the different things that kids could learn through doing this. So Battle Group Alpha was just a name for kids who wanted to make different things in woodshop. There was another group that wanted to make a yurt, and they did that. Another group that wanted to work on animation. One group that loved Doctor Who and wanted to learn more about that. Another group created a sensory walk in our hallway so that when kids were stressed or frustrated, they would have time to go there and learn and get their energy out so that they could get focused on learning. There were other people who, honestly, they just wanted to spend their time doing work for other classes. And that was an acceptable thing too, because they had the autonomy to choose what they did with that time. Other kids were really interested in teaching kids about mindset and about why growth mindset is important. Other kids wanted to teach kids how to use technology, so they made educational videos. And the list goes on. And there were so many different things that kids could have done and wanted to do. And what was amazing was that they had within themselves the ability to do that because we gave them the opportunity to do that. And this really empowered them to take more control over their learning. We had an application-only school in our district that 2 students with special needs really wanted to go to. And the culture of that school had become, it's about having high grades to be able to get into this class. And these boys would never have gotten in a typical situation, but they wanted to spend that hour and 45 minutes twice a week to work on their application, do extra work in class so that they could get their grades to a place where they would have a chance to get in. And both of these boys were able to get into that school the following year, which is just amazing because they were in the classroom that was separated from everybody else because they were so far below everybody else. And it was just amazing. So Clayton Christensen, who passed away earlier this year, is the author of this book called How You Measure Your Life, but he's more well known for his ideas on disruptive innovation. And Norma, in this book, he asks her about, what was meaningful as she was raising her kids. And she says, I typically have no memory of the events my kids recall as being important. And when I asked them about the times when Jim and I sat them down specifically to share what we thought was important, the kids have no memory of any of those things. I guess the thing to learn from this is that children will learn when they are ready to learn, not when we're ready to teach them. And as a parent, I'm sure you've noticed this in your life. As a teacher, you've probably noticed it as well. And that piece is really important. The thing to learn from this is that children will learn when they are ready to learn, not when we're ready to teach them. If we can have patience with ourselves and our expectations of ourselves of what education should or could look like, I think we're going to go far and have a lot more success in helping kids learn the way that they need to learn for them to be most successful. I really appreciate the time to talk with you today, Tamara. Thank you so much for letting me share this with your audience. A lot of these things I talk about are encapsulated in my book, School X, which if you want to get the first chapter for free, you can go to schoolx.me.
Great. Thank you, Jethro. And I just want to recap, friends, thank you for tuning in. So many of the thoughts, as usual, Jethro, that you've shared are what I believe. And in fact, much of what you've talked about, I just wrote an article about that appeared in Learning Council today. Focus on building relationships, make connections for kids from not only what they're doing now, but to their future in the workplace and in adulthood, and giving them that maker space, giving them opportunities to be creative with project-based learning and connect the dots for them from the subject matter to the activities that they care about. So thanks for giving us a real live look based on the work that you've done with your kids in Alaska and for sharing your story with us. If you have resources to share, other resources, Jethro, please send them via email and I'll make sure everybody gets them. And friends, thank you for tuning in today to Love in a Big World's EducateU show, and we will see you next time with more great information from more people who care about kids like you do. Thank you so much. Make it a great day.